A new report card for America's high school seniors is out, and the results are sobering. For the first time in more than 30 years, 12th grade reading scores have fallen to a record low, raising tough questions about what this means for students and for the nation's future. The data come from the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress, better known as the nation's report card. First administered in 1992, the exam offers the most consistent national snapshot of what students know and can do. The latest average reading score is now the lowest on record, extending a slide that began more than a decade ago rather than representing a one-year blip. What do those numbers look like in everyday terms? Nearly one-third of seniors, 32%, performed below basic, struggling with tasks as fundamental as locating a main idea or identifying supporting details. That share is the highest ever recorded. Across the board, scores slipped for almost every group of students except those at the very top, who held steady. Math results paint a similar picture. 12th grade scores are at their weakest point since 2005. Why is this happening? Researchers say the pandemic amplified the problem, but it didn't create it. Several overlapping forces appear to be driving the decline. Screen saturation. Teens spend unprecedented hours on social media and short-form videos. Rapid-fire content can condition brains for quick hits of information, making sustained attention to longer, more complex texts feel tedious. Changing classroom practice. Many English courses have shifted toward excerpts, articles, and test prep passages rather than full novels. One UCLA scholar recalls high schoolers routinely reading 20 books a year. Now, some classes assign as few as 3. Gaps in instruction. In many districts, explicit phonics and decoding lessons end after the early grades. Students who haven't fully mastered those skills are left to struggle silently as texts grow denser. Lost learning time. Even brief school closures forced by COVID-19 disrupted routines, reduced in-person feedback, and widened gaps, especially for students already on the margins. The consequences are more than theoretical. In 2024, only 35% of seniors were judged ready for college-level reading, down from 37% just 5 years earlier. Colleges, employers, and even the military rely on strong literacy. Without it, doors close. Lower literacy also limits civic engagement, everything from interpreting a ballot measure to understanding healthcare forms. U.S. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon called the trend devastating, arguing that global competitiveness demands proficient readers and critical thinkers. She emphasized that the answer isn't merely more money, but greater flexibility for states to pilot new ideas. Matthew Soldner, acting director of the Department of Education's research arm, framed the results as a warning light on the dashboard, urging concerted, focused action to accelerate student learning. So what can be done? Experts point to a back-to-basics yet forward-looking plan. Rebuild foundational skills. Continue explicit phonics, vocabulary, and fluency work well beyond elementary school. Gaps that aren't closed early only widen with age. Boost reading volume. Give students more choice, novels, biographies, graphic literature, podcasts with transcripts, anything that sparks genuine interest. Then gradually extend length and complexity to rebuild stamina. Use technology strategically. E-readers, audiobooks, and adaptive reading apps can meet students where they are while still demanding deep engagement with text. Provide targeted tutoring. Small group or one-on-one sessions, even just a few times a week, have been shown to accelerate growth for struggling readers. Track progress. Frequent, low-stakes assessments help teachers spot trouble early and adjust instruction before small problems become insurmountable. None of these steps is quick or cheap, but taken together, they amount to a coherent strategy rather than a series of disconnected fixes.
The nation's report card makes clear that literacy declines are neither isolated nor inevitable. They are the result of policy and practice choices that can be changed. The latest scores are a wake-up call, but they don't have to be a verdict. With focused effort, today's high school seniors and the classes that follow can regain the lost ground. The payoff, measured in college success, workplace productivity, and informed citizenship, is worth the work. Welcome to AITV News. In this segment, we're breaking down a major decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that affects immigration enforcement in Los Angeles and potentially the entire nation. On Monday, September 8, 2025, the court lifted restrictions on how federal immigration agents can operate, giving a green light to controversial tactics. So, what exactly happened? In a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court's conservative majority paused a lower court's order that had placed limits on Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. This decision now allows federal agents in the Los Angeles area to resume what are known as roving patrols. These patrols involve stopping and questioning people whom agents suspect of being in the country without authorization. The lower court had specifically barred ICE from stopping individuals based only on factors like their race, the language they speak, their job, or the neighborhood they are in. The Supreme Court's decision, issued quickly through its emergency docket without detailed reasoning, effectively puts that ban on hold. To understand the significance of this ruling, we need to look back at how this case started. It began in early June 2025, when the Trump administration launched a series of aggressive street sweeps in Los Angeles as part of a larger mass deportation campaign. In response, a group of civil rights organizations, including the ACLU, filed a lawsuit. They argued that ICE's methods violated the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures. The lawsuit claimed that both immigrants and U.S. citizens were being stopped and detained without a valid reason, a legal standard known as reasonable suspicion. In July, a federal judge in Los Angeles, Mame Iwusi Mensah Frimpong, reviewed the case. She found what she called a mountain of evidence suggesting that ICE's tactics amounted to blatant racial profiling and were unconstitutional. As a result, she issued a temporary restraining order to stop these practices. The government appealed, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with Judge Frimpong and kept the restrictions in place. The Trump administration then took the case to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, arguing that the limits were causing irreparable injury to its ability to enforce immigration laws. This brings us to the arguments at the heart of the Supreme Court's decision. The majority did not issue a detailed opinion, but Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote a separate concurrent opinion. He argued that the lower court's order was too restrictive. While he acknowledged that ethnicity alone cannot be the reason for a stop, he stated that it can be a relevant factor when combined with other circumstances. The government's position has been that its agents use a totality of circumstances to decide who to stop. The Trump administration claimed the restrictions acted as a straitjacket on their deportation efforts. On the other side, Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote a powerful dissent, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. She called the majority's decision a grave misuse of our emergency docket and unconscionably irreconcilable with our nation's constitutional guarantees. Justice Sotomayor wrote, "We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job." She described how countless people in the Los Angeles area have been grabbed, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed simply because of their looks, their accents, and the fact they make a living by doing manual labor. The impact of this ruling was immediate. In Los Angeles, where about 1 in every 3 residents is an immigrant, the decision has sparked fear and anger. Advocacy groups warn that it will lead to widespread racial profiling, creating what they call a papers, please regime for anyone who appears to be Latino. The political reactions have been just as strong. The Trump administration celebrated the ruling as a massive victory. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that ICE can now continue its patrols without judicial micromanagement. Following the decision, the Department of Homeland Security posted on social media its intention to flood the zone in Los Angeles. In contrast, California officials condemned the court's action. Governor Gavin Newsom called it a parade of racial terror. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass described the decision as dangerous and an attack on every person in every city in this country. Civil rights groups echoed these concerns. The ACLU said the order puts people at grave risk, while the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund called Justice Kavanaugh's reasoning outrageous. So, what happens next? It's important to understand that this is not the final word on the case.
The Supreme Court's order is temporary. It allows the patrols to resume while the lawsuit continues to make its way through the lower courts in California. However, the decision is expected to have a significant impact beyond Los Angeles, as the administration has stated its plans to increase immigration raids in other cities across the country. The ruling sets a new tone for immigration enforcement, at least for now, by removing judicial limits that were put in place to prevent what a lower court found to be unconstitutional racial profiling. On the banks of the Blue Nile River in Ethiopia, a project more than a decade in the making has just been completed. It's a concrete giant, nearly 2 kilometers long and 145 meters high, and it has created a reservoir larger than Greater London. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or Gerd, Africa's largest hydroelectric project, officially inaugurated on September 9, 2025. For Ethiopia, this $5 billion dam is more than just a source of power. It's a symbol of national pride and a cornerstone of its economic future. But for its downstream neighbors, Egypt and Sudan, it's a source of deep anxiety, sparking a decade-long dispute over the world's longest river. So what did it take for Ethiopia to build this monumental structure? And what does its completion mean for the future of this vital region? The primary motivation behind the Gerd is Ethiopia's urgent need for electricity. With a rapidly growing population of over 120 million, nearly half the country has historically lacked reliable access to power. The dam is set to more than double Ethiopia's electricity generation, with a massive capacity of 5,150 megawatts. This new power is intended to light up homes, schools, and hospitals, and fuel the country's ambition to transform from a farming economy into an industrial hub. Beyond its borders, Ethiopia plans to export surplus electricity to its neighbors, projecting over $1 billion in annual revenue. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is how the dam was paid for. After failing to secure international funding, Ethiopia turned to its own people. The vast majority of the project was financed domestically. The government sold bonds that ordinary citizens, from farmers to students to those living abroad, eagerly purchased. Public sector workers even contributed portions of their salaries. This unique crowdsourcing effort fostered an incredible sense of national ownership and unity around the project, which began construction in 2011 and involved over 25,000 people. But as Ethiopia celebrated, its downstream neighbors watched with concern. Egypt, a nation of over 100 million people, depends on the Nile for about 90% of its fresh water.
Cairo has long viewed the dam as a potential existential threat, fearing that Ethiopia could restrict the river's flow, especially during times of drought. Egypt points to colonial-era treaties that granted it a majority share of the Nile's water, but Ethiopia, which was not a party to those agreements, rejects them. Sudan's position is more complex. Geographically caught in the middle, it shares Egypt's worries about water security. However, Sudan also stands to benefit from the Gerd. The dam could help manage the devastating annual floods of the Blue Nile and provide Sudan with cheap, reliable electricity. In fact, there is already evidence that the dam has helped control overflow at one of Sudan's own dams downstream. For over a decade, the three countries have been locked in negotiations, often mediated by the African Union, but have failed to reach a legally binding agreement on how the dam should be filled and operated in the long term. Egypt and Sudan have consistently called for a binding deal, while Ethiopia has proceeded with filling the dam's vast reservoir, which was completed in late 2024 and is now known as Lake of Dawn. Ethiopian officials, including Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, have repeatedly stated that the dam is not intended to harm any downstream nations, framing it as a shared opportunity for regional development. So far, independent research has shown no major disruptions to the Nile's flow, partly due to favorable rainfall during the multi-year filling process. The inauguration of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam marks a new reality in the Nile Basin. The dam is no longer a plan or a construction site. It is a functioning powerhouse. The conversation has now shifted from preventing its completion to managing its operation. The critical question that remains is whether these three nations can move from a decade of dispute to a new era of cooperation. Finding a way to collaboratively manage the precious waters of the Nile will determine the future stability and prosperity of the entire region.